"You've got 48 hours to rip out that dock," were the first words I ever heard from the HOA president, spoken right on my welcome mat, like she was handing me a ticket. And behind her stood 4 board members with clipboards and practiced smiles, while Blue Heron Lake winked over her shoulder like it knew a secret I didn't. I asked her name, and she tapped her pen like a metronome. Said Marla Trent Harbor. "Point HOA, we manage all lakefront access. You need to comply." And I glanced past her at 7 identical community docks nailed into the west bank with polished little logos that said Harbor Point. And I said real, gentle, funny, because those are on my shoreline. So tell me again who manages what. When 3 days earlier, I'd pulled up in a rental truck with my whole life in boxes, a 9-year-old in the passenger seat, kicking her heels against the glove box, and a knot in my chest that eased only when the porch swing creaked and the light off the water hit me in the face, and my daughter Lena said, "Is that ours?" And I said, "Yeah, kid, that's ours," even though I barely believed it, even though the house still smelled like lemon oil and rain, and my Aunt June's crocheted blanket lay folded on the couch like she'd just stepped out for tomatoes. They came on day 3 like a weather front read-off numbers, like liturgy, retroactive, lakefront assessment, 200 due now dock maintenance, 475 a month. HOA dues, 225, removal of a non-compliant private structure within 48 hours. Under Section 8. And when they said CC&Rs, it sounded like a spell, and I let them run it all down, then held up my folder with the deed, dated 1976, that said 5.1 acres with private water rights. And I told them it predates your paperwork by 14 years. And there's no signature from my aunt on your 1990 covenant package. And the tall guy in the polo gave me the kind of smile you give a kid who thinks Monopoly money spends at the grocery store. And he said, "We can explain the law if you're new to planned communities." And I said, "Explain it slow. I learn better when I'm insulted first," which Lena later repeated back to me with a grin, because kids are recorders you don't know are running. They left a stack of papers anyway, and 2 hours later, an email arrived that said, "New residents comply. First ask questions later." Signed by Marla CC'd to the board, and to a name I didn't know. Bryce Lang from Langshore Capital, which meant nothing to me in that moment, except it would end up meaning everything. And I wrote back asking for board minutes. The last audit, the legal basis for retroactive, anything. And I got another sentence about protecting property values. You know? The tune, the one people hum when they need everyone to stop thinking. My first ally was Ruth. Next door, sun hat, laugh like a bell. A pie still warm in her hands. She sat on my porch and told me, "Straight June never bent to that board, and if I was smart, I wouldn't either." And that night, after Lena fell asleep with a library book on her chest, I spread the CC&Rs on the kitchen table, opened the state property statutes, and did the thing I'm actually good at, which is reading fine print until the words give up their tricks. And what I found was simple, clean, boring in the best way. The deed was clear. As the county stamp, the HOA paperwork came later and had no signature from June, and retroactive restrictions. Don't stick without consent, so I started a folder called Lake, scanned every page, time-stamped everything, because if this turned into a fight, I wanted the record to be better than their memory. Day 5. A county notice showed up about an unpermitted structure and penalties and removal. Anonymous complaint, and I called the clerk, and she sounded like coffee and fluorescent lights. Said records that old, live on microfilm, and I could request a certified copy. but there's a backlog, 6 to 8 weeks. And I said, sure, put me in the backlog, and that night, a car idled at the end of my driveway with its high beams, pointed at the living room for one slow minute that stretched like taffy. And when I stepped outside with my phone up, it backed away. No plates, no faces, just the quiet hum of a message. And the next morning, I installed cameras at the door, the driveway, the dock. The porch told Lena they were for owls, and she gave me that look like, "Dad, please." The twist snuck in. As a note, I could have missed a yellowed envelope in Aunt June's desk with her neat block letters, "Dock easement recorded. Revocable on 90 days. Notice if they get pushy. Read paragraph 3 twice, and I took that note to the recorder's office, a low brick place that smells like paper dust, and I asked for everything with June's name on it, and there it was in black and white. She had granted Harbor Point permission to put 7 community docks on a 180 by 40 strip of her shoreline. As a courtesy, the kind of neighborly thing that keeps people from glaring over fences. And in paragraph 3, it said, "The grantor reserves the right to revoke this easement upon 90 days. Written notice, which is lawyer for this, exists because we allow it, not because you own it." And I bought 2 certified copies, sat in my truck, and laughed a laugh. I didn't recognize, half relief, half, "Oh, you picked the wrong quiet person." On the way home, I looked up that CCE'd name, clicked through a glossy site with drone shots, and found renderings that looked a whole lot like my Lake Cedar Harbor Lodge and marina integrating existing community infrastructure, which is a polite way of saying, "We plan to keep using your stuff." And that's when I called a real estate attorney named Tessa, who didn't waste words. I gave her the short version, and she said, "Send everything. Your deed beats their covenant on your parcel. If your aunt never signed in the easement is leverage, don't pull it unless you must, and document every interaction like a hostile merger." And I said, "Got it." The smear kicked in like someone had a playbook. A brand new account in the Harbor Point Facebook group accused me of refusing to pay a fair share. A dozen comments praising firm leadership and standards. A long lens photo of me and Lena on our own dock, framed like a crime scene, and a burner email landed in my inbox with a forwarded board thread that included the phrase, "People like him." And I'm a boring dad with a soft spot for gas station coffee. But I know what people like him is supposed to do. Keep his head down and swallow it. And I guess I missed that memo. Ruth showed up again this time, with a reusable grocery bag and a hand that shook just a little. She set it on my table and said, "You didn't get this from me." And inside was a thumb drive labeled 2016 to 2018, with ledgers and bank statements, and a hole at the bottom of the bucket. Consulting with no invoices. For strategic planning, with no deliverables. Vendors that pointed to nowhere, and then an email thread between Marla and that developer saying 12% commission on development value. If we consolidate the lake under HOA policy by Q4, you deliver the water, we deliver the lodge. And I forwarded it to Tessa with the subject. I think this is what intent looks like because, yeah, that happened. We built a plan at my kitchen table, 4 fronts that held each other up legal, with a motion to dismiss and a countersuit for harassment and breach of fiduciary duty, administrative, with a complaint to the state, and a petition for a forensic audit that only needed 4 signatures media with a reporter named Kayla, who'd spent years wading through HOA nonsense and could smell a conflict of interest from a church parking lot away, and community with a town hall at a neutral county room where no one could claim we used HOA funds for a coup Just a projector, a timeline, and 3 questions for the board. Kayla's story went live 2 days later. Dry as a law book on purpose, and it laid out the easement. The ledger holes, the 12% email, and the board responded with a denial that didn't deny anything specific, which told me they were counting on volume and fatigue. You know what I mean? And by Thursday night, the room was full, over 70 people from a neighborhood that only shows up for free. Barbecue or storms. And I kept my opener short. My name is Cole. I moved in 3 weeks ago. The HOA told me to tear out my dock and pay retroactive fees. Here is what the law says. Here is what your board discussed with a private developer while telling me to comply first and ask questions later. Then I put June's 1976 deed on the screen with the county stamp and the line about private water rights highlighted. Like the sun did it for me, then the 1990 easement zoomed to paragraph 3. Revocable on 90 days' notice. Every slip on that west bank exists because my aunt allowed it, not because the HOA owns the water. Then the ledger cuts, and the vendors that led to nowhere. Then the emails. And I read the line. Slow. You deliver the water. We deliver the lodge. And I invited Ruth to tell the room how asking for invoices got her call difficult, and then replaced in a closed session labeled Reorganization. And by the time I turned to the back row where Marla sat with her arms folded, the temperature had changed. I asked 3 questions and didn't dress them up. Can you produce invoices for those consulting fees tonight? Why was a private developer CC'd on my compliance email? Did you disclose the proposed 12% commission to homeowners? And she said proper channels and stakeholder consultation, and then nothing. And in that silence, a man from the 3rd row with a flag on his truck said, I move for a vote of no confidence, and someone seconded before I exhaled, and hands went up like a wave, and the air went out of that corner of the room, and Marla went pale, and said, This is a witch hunt, and packed her bag, and left. The door thumped, and that's the moment the movie would cut to black, but life drifts. And 2 days later, the state asked me for records. The county found the 1981 dock permit on microfilm that smelled like plastic. Langshore scrubbed the lodge renderings, and neighbors who had scowled at me near the deli started nodding and asking how Lena liked her school, and Ruth brought tomatoes that tasted like actual sunlight and said June would be smiling, and I believed her. I haven't revoked the dock easement I could. A letter 90 days teeth out of the shoreline, and some nights when I remember the headlights or the phrase people like him. I want to, but most mornings, I want pancakes and a kid who thinks dragonflies are tiny helicopters. So I sent a different letter, not a hammer. A reminder the easement exists at my courtesy, maintenance, and safety are on the association. Any attempt to fold it into a third-party project is a breach. And the interim board replied received and understood. And that's where we are. A truce that tastes like caution and lake air. Tell me what you think. Honestly. Where's the line between protecting property values and hiding control? Who gets to draw it, and why? And if you've been pushed by a system with a shiny name, tell me your version. What was right supposed to look like, and what did justice feel like when you finally made it stick? Drop a comment, challenge me if you want. And if stories like this help you breathe a little easier, hit subscribe and tell me where you're watching from. I'll read every word.